Karen and her two
Now,
bored cronies,
if you have
a
any
pair of
questions,
sycophants
I
named
ask that
Barry
you
and
hold them
Linda,
until the
sat at
end.
the head table looking flustered. She clearly hadn't expected this kind of turnout. Banged the gavel, her face a mask of forced composure. "Welcome to this unscheduled gathering," she began, her voice tight. "Due to a frivolous and frankly misguided petition, we are legally obligated to hold this meeting. Let's get this nonsense over with." I stood up. "According to the bylaws, Karen, the petitioners get to speak first." I walked to the podium, the sheath of papers in my hand feeling as heavy as a stone tablet. I could feel every eye in the room on me. "My name is John Winters," I started, my voice steady. "And for the last month, my family has been targeted by our HOA president. We have been stalked, harassed, and robbed. We are not the only ones." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Karen shot to her feet. "That is a slanderous accusation. You have no proof." "Oh, I have proof," I said calmly, looking out at the crowd. "But first, I want to talk about why we're here. We are here because this board has forgotten who it works for. It does not work for Karen Granson's ego. It works for us, the homeowners. And when the board uses our money and our rules to intimidate and extort its members, it has broken our trust."
Point of order,
Karen shouted, banging her gavel.
This
"Is not a trial. State the reason for the recall, or sit down." I ignored her. I turned to Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Gable, would you be willing to share what happened to you?" The old woman, shaking slightly, stood up from her chair. In a quiet but clear voice, she told the entire room about the attic inspection, about Gus, about the $3,000 she paid him in cash because she was afraid of what they would do if she refused. When she finished, the room went still. Then from the back, someone yelled, "Shame!" The room erupted. People started shouting their own stories about the fines, the threats, the constant feeling of being watched. It was a dam of frustration breaking all at once. Karen's face was pale, her composure cracking. She looked cornered, desperate. That's when she made her move. She nodded to the back of the room. A huge figure detached himself from the shadows by the door. It was Gus. He started walking towards the podium, towards me. "This meeting is out of control," Karen yelled over the noise. "This man is a threat to the board's safety. Gus, escort Mr. Winters out." Gus was a professional bully, but he wasn't used to a room full of angry homeowners staring him down. He hesitated. He looked at me, then at the crowd, then back at Karen, as if looking for confirmation. "Get him out of here," she shrieked. Gus reached for my arm. Before he could touch me, a cane shot out from the side and hooked around his ankle. It was neighbor Nate, who looked as surprised as anyone. Gus, not expecting a tripwire at shin level, went down like a sack of potatoes, crashing into a table of lukewarm coffee and powdered donuts. Chaos ensued. Barry the crony tried to help Gus up and got shoved by Dave, the meek neighbor from the first meeting who seemed to have found his courage. Linda, the other crony, started screaming. It was a full-blown suburban riot. I just stood at the podium watching it all unfold. The recall was no longer in question. Karen had lost the room, lost control, and lost her power. The vote was officially scheduled, as per the bylaws, to be held in 10 days at the annual neighborhood block party. As the chaos subsided and people started to separate, Karen pushed her way through the crowd until she was standing right in front of me. Her face was a terrifying mask of pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes were burning. "You think you've won?" She hissed, her voice low and venomous so only I could hear. "You have no idea what's coming for you, Winters. It's not over." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. In looking into her eyes, I knew she was more dangerous now than ever before. Karen's threat hung in the air for the next 10 days, toxic cloud over our neighborhood. There was a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. The block party, usually a day of bouncy castles and friendly chatter, was now shaping up to be a full-blown showdown. We knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. Her threat wasn't just hot air. She was planning something. A final, desperate move to crush the rebellion and cling to her little throne. We had to be ready. This time, we weren't just defending our home. We were coordinating an entire neighborhood. Sam's home office became the official resistance headquarters. We held secret meetings after dark, with neighbors huddled in our living room, planning our counter-move like we were plotting a revolution. The plan we came up with was audacious, theatrical, and, if it worked, would be the final nail in Karen Granson's coffin. It was Sam's masterpiece. Theme of the operation was simple: more blue. She wants to play dirty, Sam said, pointing to a map of the block party layout on our whiteboard. So we're going to drown her in it, publicly, with 100 witnesses and a dozen cameras rolling. The final piece was the human element. We had the digital and physical evidence, but we needed to show a pattern of behavior. We needed to prove that we weren't her only victims. I spent the next 2 days walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and just talking to people. At first, no one wanted to speak. They were afraid of retaliation, of fines, of having their own power cut. But then I spoke to Mrs. Gable, a sweet, elderly widow who lived on the next street over. When I told her what had happened to us, she burst into tears. She told me a story about how Karen had insisted on an attic insulation inspection last winter. Gus had gone into her attic alone and discovered a host of dangerous code violations that had to be fixed immediately. He charged her $3,000 for a few hours of work that probably involved kicking some dust around. She was too scared and embarrassed to tell anyone. Mrs. Gable's story was the key. Once she agreed to write down what happened, others started to come forward. There was the young couple, fined $1,000, because their toddler's tricycle was left on the driveway for 2 hours. There was the man who was forced to tear down a brand new deck because the stain he used was, according to Karen, too rustic. He gathered half a dozen signed, notarized statements. We laid it all out on the whiteboard, the burglary on camera, the tracker data leading to the pawn shop's security footage, the blue stain on the planner linking Karen to the scene of her documented trespassing, and now a sheaf of witness statements detailing a pattern of extortion and intimidation. It was an airtight case. We could have gone to the police right then, but Sam stopped me. "The police will file a report," she said, her eyes flashing. "This will get tied up in the courts for years. She needs to be removed from power now." She pulled out the thick binder of HOA bylaws, and I think I know how to do it. She pointed to a dusty, forgotten clause. Article 9. Emergency removal of a board member. It required a petition signed by 25% of the homeowners to force a special recall meeting. It was time to take the fight back to the clubhouse. Getting 25% of the homeowners to sign a petition against a sitting HOA president is like trying to nail jelly to a tree. People are afraid. They don't want to get involved. They're worried their trash cans will suddenly be declared non-compliant, or their prize-winning roses will be cited for being excessively thorny. But fear is a powerful motivator, and Karen Granson had spread a lot of it around. As it turned out, so is righteous anger. When people heard Mrs. Gable's story, something shifted. Intimidating me was one thing. I was a stubborn guy who could handle himself, but extorting a sweet old widow? That was a bridge too far, even for our timid little community. The signatures came faster than we expected. We needed 40 signatures. We got 6 to L. With the signed petition in hand, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. We weren't just victims anymore. We were leading a rebellion. Sam drafted the official notice for the emergency recall meeting, citing the bylaw and the purpose of the vote. We posted it on the community bulletin board. Right over a flyer for Karen's upcoming patriotic pet parade, the meeting was set for the following Thursday. The night of the meeting, the beige community clubhouse was transformed. It was packed, standing room only. The air, usually stale with boredom, was electric with tension. People who never came to meetings were there, standing along the walls, their arms crossed, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Sam and I took seats in the front row. Neighbor Nate gave me a thumbs up from across the room. Mrs. Gable was there, sitting with a few other ladies who looked equally nervous and resolute. Sam pulled out her phone and placed it on the counter. She played a short, crystal-clear video clip from the hidden birdhouse camera. It showed Gus's face as he approached our house, then a clear shot of him hauling the safe across our lawn. "This is a recording of a felony burglary," Sam said, her voice calm and professional. "That safe is our property, and it contains a GPS tracker that led us directly to your front door. Now you have two options. Option 1. You cooperate with us. We get our property back, and this problem goes away for you. Option 2. We walk out that door, call the Hilton County Police, and they come here with a warrant and security footage of you receiving stolen property. Your choice. Abe swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the phone back to our faces. He made the smart decision. He led us to the back room, and there it was, our decoy safe, sitting on a shelf next to a dusty saxophone and a collection of power tools. We had him log a property receipt for the safe and burned his camera footage to a second drive for PD. It was beautiful, a clear shot of Gus dragging the safe in, a dong danom, and an even clearer shot of the cash transaction. We had him cold, but Gus was just the muscle. We needed to tie this directly to Karen. That's when Sam remembered the dye trap video. Watch the clipboard, she said. Zooming in on the exact moment the blue dye hit Karen, we watched it in slow motion, frame by frame. The blue liquid didn't just hit her. It splattered everywhere, and we saw it. A clear, distinct spatter of cobalt blue landing right on the corner of the fancy, leather-bound daily planner she was holding. It was a unique, starburst-shaped stain. It was a fingerprint. That's good, I said. But how do we prove she still has it? Sam grinned. Because our dear HOA president is a narcissist who loves social media? What? She pulled up the HOA's official Facebook page. It was a nauseating collection of photos of Karen cutting ribbons, planting petunias, and handing out oversized checks. Sam scrolled back through the posts from the last week, and there it was, a photo from a charity bake sale 2 days ago. Karen was standing there, smiling her fake smile, and in her hand was the leather planner. And on the bottom right corner, partially obscured but still visible, was a familiar-looking, starburst-shaped dark blue stain. We had her. The glow of the tablet on our faces, and we waited. For an hour, nothing happened. I was starting to get antsy. Maybe she didn't take the bait, I whispered. Patience, Sam said, her eyes glued to the screen. A predator always circles its prey before it strikes. At 9:47 p.m., a dark, windowless van without any logos rolled quietly into the neighborhood and parked a few houses down. The engine cut. My breath caught in my throat. A minute later, the passenger door opened and a large figure emerged. Even in the grainy night vision of the camera, the man's lumbering gait was unmistakable. It was Gus. He moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, his eyes scanning the houses around him. He slipped into our backyard. A few moments later, the camera covering the back of the house showed him using a crowbar to pry open the kitchen window. He disappeared inside. We sat in stunned silence, watching the feeds. We couldn't see inside, but we knew what he was after. 5 minutes later, the back door opened. Gus reappeared, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. He was struggling, half dragging, half carrying the heavy decoy safe. He wrestled it across the lawn and heaved it into the back of the van. The van's doors slid shut, and it pulled away as silently as it had arrived. My first instinct was pure rage. He had broken into my house. But then Sam held up her phone. On the screen was a map of our neighborhood, and on that map a tiny blue dot was blinking. It was moving away from our house, heading towards the main road. Got him, Sam said, a grim smile on her face. The tracker was live. The trap had been sprung. Now, all we had to do was follow the bred CRUMBs. The adrenaline from the break-in carried us through the night. We didn't sleep. Our office became a war room. Sam projected the live map from the RFID tracker onto the main wall. The little blue dot, our stolen safe, was on the move. I had a big whiteboard set up, the kind you see in detective movies, and I started scrawling notes, drawing lines, connecting the dots of Karen Granson's criminal enterprise. This was no longer just a feud. It was an investigation. The first piece of evidence was the tracker itself. The safe didn't go to a storage unit or Gus's house, as we'd expected. Instead, the blue dot traveled across town and came to a stop in a commercial district known for its bail bondsmen and sketchy all-night check-cashing places. It stopped moving at a specific address. Sam typed it into a search engine. The result came back instantly. Honest Abe's Pawn and Loan. We buy anything. Took it straight to a pawn shop, I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. He couldn't even wait a day. He's not just a thug, he's a dumb thug. The next morning, we parked across from Honest Abe's before it opened. The place was a caricature of a seedy pawn shop, with iron bars on the windows and a flickering neon sign. We watched as a greasy-looking man with a ponytail unlocked the front door. We gave him 30 minutes to get his coffee brewing, and then we went in. The shop smelled of dust and desperation. The man behind the counter, presumably Abe, looked at us with bored, suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" I put on my most pleasant, non-threatening smile. "Good morning. We're here about a safe. A Black Century brand safe, brought in late last night by a very large gentleman." Abe's face went blank. "Don't know what you're talking about." Our digital fortress was now complete. It was time to set the bait. She's after something inside the house, I reasoned. The garage checks, the key. She's convinced I'm hiding something. Let's give her something to find. The plan was simple, but it relied on Karen's own greed and obsession. I went to a big box store and bought a cheap fireproof safe. It was heavy, black, and looked very official. I brought it home and, in the garage, with the door wide open for anyone watching to see, I proceeded to make a show of putting things inside it. I wrapped a few bricks in bubble wrap to give them a sense of importance. I added an old broken laptop and a bag of spare bolts to give it some weight and make it rattle just right. The final ingredient was the real genius of the plan. Tucked inside the padding of the safe, I placed a tiny GPS-enabled RFID tracker. It was no bigger than a quarter, with a battery that would last for a month. It would ping its location to Sam's phone every 60 seconds once it was activated. The trap was almost ready. We just needed to get the word out. That's where neighbor Nate came in. I caught him while he was trimming his hedges the next morning. "Nate," I said, leaning over the fence conspiratorially, "I need to ask you a favor. Can you keep an eye on our place? With all this craziness going on, I've had two. Well, I've moved some important things home, from the bank. Just until this all blows over." Nate's eyes went wide. "Oh my." "Of course, John. My lips are sealed." I knew Nate's lips were about as sealed as a screen door in a hurricane. He was the neighborhood's most prolific and good-natured gossip. The news that John Winters was keeping valuables in a safe at home because of the HOA? Drama would be all over the street by lunchtime. Karen would hear about it. It was, as Sam had called it, Karenip, a locked box she wasn't allowed to open, rumored to be full of treasure. She wouldn't be able to resist. That Friday, we made a big show of leaving for the evening. We told Nate we were going out for a fancy date night to celebrate our anniversary, which wasn't for another 6 months. We got dressed up, got in the car, and drove away, waving cheerfully. We drove around the block, parked on a side street with a clear view of our neighborhood, and Sam pulled up the live feed from the new 4G cameras on a tablet. The Wasp, a small, quiet drone she usually used for photography, was hovering silently at 200 feet, giving us a bird's-eye view. The house looked quiet. A perfect target. We sat in the dark car. "Can I help you?" I asked, stepping in front of Sam. I held the heavy flashlight like a club. He stopped at the edge of our lawn, just outside the glow of the porch light. "I'm here to inspect the illegal modifications you made to your front porch," he grunted, jerking a thumb towards the front door. "Board president sent me." "It's 1 o'clock in the morning," I said, my voice flat. "And you're on private property. You need to leave now." "I've got a work order," he said, taking a step onto the grass. "I'm not leaving until I've done my inspection." This was it. The physical intimidation. Karen had sent her goon. My hot-headed nature, which I usually kept simmering on the back burner, it started to boil over. "You take one more step onto my lawn," I said, my voice low and shaking with anger, "and I'm going to introduce you to the police." He just laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The police? Karen's got them on a leash. Now get out of my way." He lunged forward, not to attack me, but to push past me, to get to my porch, to my door. My protective instincts took over. I wasn't going to let this mountain of a man near my wife or my home. I planted my feet and shoved back hard. He was strong, but I had leverage and a whole lot of adrenaline on my side. He stumbled backward, surprised by the resistance. His face twisted into a snarl. "You put your hands on me?" he growled, balling his fists. For a second, I thought he was going to swing. We stood there, face to face on the edge of my property, a silent, tense standoff. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of Sam racking the slide on the shotgun we kept for emergencies. Muzzle down, finger clear. We didn't point it at anyone. Gus heard it too. His eyes flickered past me to the doorway, and his bravado evaporated. He took a slow step back. "This isn't over," he snarled, pointing a thick finger at me. "Karen always gets what she wants." He turned and lumbered back down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding, the Wi-Fi jammer still clutched in one hand. The game had changed completely. Fines, power cuts, and now a hired thug on my porch at 1 o'clock in the morning. This was a full-scale campaign of harassment designed to either break us or force us out, but they had made a critical mistake. They hadn't broken us. They had just made us angry. And they had no idea how resourceful a very angry man and his even angrier Texavy wife could be. The scuffle with Gus was the final straw. The world-weary part of me that just wanted to be left alone was officially dead and buried. Karen Granson wasn't just trying to annoy us anymore. She was trying to intimidate us into submission with threats of physical violence. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The question of how far is too far was a dot in the rear-view mirror. Now, the only question was, how do we end this for good? We were sitting in our command center, what used to be our cozy home office end. The mood was grim. The fun of the blue dye trap had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of our situation. "She's using a proxy," Sam said, typing furiously. "This Gus character gives her plausible deniability. We can't prove she sent him, so we need to connect them," I said, the gears in my head starting to turn. "We need to catch them working together, and we need to do it without them knowing we're watching." Our current camera system was good, but it was vulnerable. As we'd seen, if they cut the power and jammed the Wi-Fi, we were blind. That had to change. Sam, my brilliant, beautiful, and slightly terrifying wife, already had a plan. "We're building a new network," she declared. A ghost network. For the next 2 days, our house was a whirlwind of technological warfare preparation. Sam ordered a set of new cameras. These weren't Wi-Fi based. They operated on a 4G cellular signal, each with its own internal battery pack that could last for 72 hours. They were small, easily hidden, and completely independent of our home's power and internet. One went into a birdhouse I mounted on the old oak tree in our front yard. Another was disguised as a rock in the flower bed. A third, with a powerful zoom lens, was placed in the attic window, giving us a perfect sniper's eye view of the entire neighborhood. Next, she built the ghost network. She set up a new encrypted mesh Wi-Fi system. Unlike a traditional router, a mesh network used multiple nodes that all talked to each other, creating a web of connectivity. If one node was jammed or went down, the others would automatically reroute the signal. It was self-healing and incredibly difficult to disable completely. The viral video was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was deeply, profoundly satisfying to watch the clip of Karen's blue baptism make the rounds. The schadenfreude was delicious. On the other hand, it pushed a clever, petty woman into a corner. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Her public humiliation didn't chasten her. It fueled her. The retaliation was not subtle. It was a blunt instrument of bureaucratic and physical intimidation. Designed to break us, the first volley came through the mail slot. It was a thick envelope from the Hilton County HOA. Inside was a stack of violation notices. There was a $500 fine for the unapproved alteration to the exterior color scheme, referring to the blue dye splattered on our siding. There was a $750 fine for creating a hazardous condition on a common walkway. For the blue footprints she had left, and my personal favorite, a $1,000 fine for harassment of a board member, which was so laughably false it would have been funny if the total bill hadn't been over $2,000. "She can't be serious," I said, fanning the papers out on the kitchen table. "This is insane." We have video proof she was trespassing. It's not about being right, John, Sam said, her voice tight. It's about making our lives hell. She'll bury us in paperwork and legal fees. She's using the HOA's money to fight us. That was just the start. The real escalation came 3 nights later. It was just after midnight. The house was dark and quiet. Suddenly, everything went black. The lights, the television, the hum of the refrigerator all gone. A power outage. I fumbled for my phone, its screen blindingly bright in the sudden darkness. I checked the neighborhood outage map. We were the only house on the street, the only house in a 5-mile radius without power. Before I could even process what that meant, a low hum started up from the basement. And the emergency light Sam had installed in the hallways flickered on. The backup generator had kicked in. Sam was already at her command center, which was now running on battery backups in the generator. The power line to the house was manually disconnected at the street box, she said, pointing to a diagram on her screen. Someone had to physically open the box and pull the breaker. The next morning, I called the power company. The cheerful woman on the phone told me there was a work order to disconnect our service. When I asked who authorized it, she said the request came from the property management company for our address, the HOA. I filed a fraud report. The utility locked our account to in-person ID only and flagged any future change requests. Karen had impersonated a property manager to have our power cut in the middle of the night. This was no longer petty. This was dangerous. What if we didn't have a generator? What if it was the middle of winter? The following night, she came for our internet. We were trying to watch a movie when the screen froze, then went to a buffering symbol. My phone lost its Wi-Fi signal. Sam's face hardened. We're being jammed, she said. She grabbed a strange-looking device with an antenna from her desk and walked through the house. The signal is strongest near the front yard. I grabbed the big mag light from the kitchen, and we went outside. In the thick azalea bush near the porch, tucked away near the roots, was a small black box with a blinking red light, a portable, high-powered Wi-Fi jammer. It was military-grade stuff, not something you pick up at a surplus store. We bagged it with gloves, logged the find on video, and reported it to Hilton County PD and the FCC hotline. This took resources. This was planned. While I was pulling the device out of the dirt, Sam grabbed my arm. John, look. A man was walking down the street directly towards our house. He was big, built like a refrigerator with a shaved head and a sour expression. He was wearing a jacket with a Gus's Handyman Services logo on it. Sam, meanwhile, was fortifying our digital defenses. She installed 2 new high-definition cameras on the porch, hardwired into a dedicated recording server with a battery backup. One was obvious, mounted right over the door. The other was hidden inside a fake sprinkler head in the flower bed, giving us a perfect low-angle shot. Doorbell cam, porch cam, and the sprinkler cam. Timestamps synced to the second. We need every angle, she said, running cables through the wall. We're not just catching her. We're producing a movie. The final piece of the puzzle was the legal one. I wasn't an idiot. I knew setting a trap, even a non-lethal one, could be a legal gray area. So, I covered my bases. I printed a new sign on a huge piece of white plastic sheeting. In big, bold red letters, it read, "Private property, no trespassing, all unlawful entries are prohibited and will be documented. Violators will be met with non-lethal deterrence." I used for heavy-duty bolts to mount it right next to the front door. It was ugly as sin, but it was impossible to miss. I also filed a report with Hilton County PD and wrote the case number on the fridge. No one could claim they weren't warned. With the trap set and the sign posted, the house felt different. It was no longer just a home. It was a fortress waiting for a siege. We didn't change the front door lock. That was the bait. We wanted her to think her key still worked. Every night, we'd come home and check the tripwire. Every morning, we'd check the camera footage. For 3 days, nothing. The quiet was starting to get to me again. The waiting gnawing at my nerves. I was starting to think maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she'd given up. On the 4th day, a Tuesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my phone buzzed with a notification from Sam. It wasn't a text. It was a link to a live camera feed. My heart leaped into my throat. I clicked the link. The screen filled with a crystal-clear image of our front porch. And standing there, looking smug and self-satisfied, was Karen Granson. She was holding her stupid clipboard and wearing a crisp, blindingly white pantsuit. She looked left, then right, checking to see if anyone was watching. She didn't see the little black dome of the camera staring right at her. She didn't see the fake sprinkler head aimed at her feet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My key. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling. And Her Majesty was about to step into my FOIA trap. All we had to do now was wait for the splash. My hand was shaking so hard the phone screen blurred. I took a deep breath, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. This was it, the moment of truth. Sam sent a text message that just said, "Showtime." I could feel the grin in that one word. On the screen, Karen Granson was a portrait of smug arrogance. She held the key up, glinting in the afternoon sun like it owned the place. She gave our new "no trespassing" sign a dismissive sneer, as if the rules were merely suggestions for other, lesser people. She clearly thought the sign was just a bluff, a desperate act from the man who had dared to defy her. She had no idea she was about to become the star of a very short, very colorful film. She slid the key into the lock. My heart hammered. What if the lock was sticky? What if the key didn't turn? But it did. We heard the faint, sickeningly familiar click of the tumbler turning, even through the phone's speaker. The doorknob twisted. She pushed the door inward. For a split second, nothing happened. The door swung open a few inches, revealing the dark entryway behind it. Karen took a confident step forward, her expensive leather shoe. Crossing the threshold of my home, her foot snagged the fishing line. The motion was instantaneous, a beautiful piece of simple physics in action. The line pulled the pin. The spring-loaded shelf, freed from its restraint, tipped forward. The bucket filled with 1 gallon of highly concentrated, non-toxic, personality-staining cobalt blue dye. Tilted over the edge. Time seemed to slow down. The blue liquid poured out in a thick, perfect arc. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. It hit her square on the head and shoulders. The pristine white pantsuit vanished under a tidal wave of blue. It stains clothes for days, not skin. Petty, not cruel. Her perfect blonde helmet of hair was instantly saturated. Turning a shocking, vibrant shade of smurf, the dye cascaded down her face, over her clipboard, and onto her shoes, pooling on my porch. "Welcome, Matt," which now ironically read. "Welcome to our home," and a spreading puddle of blue dot, the camera hidden in the sprinkler head captured. The look on her face, in glorious high definition, it was a silent movie of emotions. First, shock. Her eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O. Then, confusion, as her brain tried to process what was happening. And finally, as the cold, sticky liquid soaked through to her skin, came the rage. It was pure, distilled fury, twisting her features into an ugly snarl. She let out a shriek that was so high-pitched it probably shattered windows in the next county. She staggered backward, slipping on the now-slick porch. Her arms flailed, sending blue droplets spattering against the siding and the newly posted sign. The clipboard, her symbol of authority, fell from her grasp and landed with a wet slap in the puddle. The papers inside instantly ruined with a giant blue Rorschach test. The whole event, from the door opening to the scream, took less than 5 seconds. Sam, in her infinite wisdom, had set the cameras to record in a continuous loop. So we had it all. She immediately saved the clip from multiple angles and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. Evidence secured. The aftermath was even better than the event itself. My comic relief neighbor, Nate, a retired gentleman who spent most of his days tending to his prize-winning petunias, was outside with his watering can. He had witnessed the entire thing. We saw him on the driveway camera. His jaw dropped, his watering can fell from his hand, and he just stood there, frozen for a full 10 seconds. Then he slowly, deliberately turned around, walked back into his house, and shut the door, as if he had just witnessed something so magnificent and terrifying that he needed a moment to process it. Karen, meanwhile, was having a full-blown meltdown. She was sputtering, trying to wipe the dye from her eyes, which only smeared it further across her face. She looked like a villain from a children's cartoon. She looked up, her eyes finally focusing. She saw it. The main camera mounted right above the door she had illegally opened. The little red light indicating it was recording was on. Her rage momentarily vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, cold panic. She knew. She knew she'd been caught. She'd been played. She'd walked right into a trap that was not only humiliating but also perfectly documented. She pointed a dripping, blue finger at the camera. "You?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You will regret this, Winters. You will regret this." She turned and squished her way off the porch, leaving a trail of bright blue footprints down my walkway and onto the pristine sidewalk of our quiet suburban street. She got into her white SUV, smearing blue all over the driver's side door and the leather seat, and peeled out of the neighborhood with a squeal of tires. Inside my kitchen, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. It came out as a laugh, a deep, loud, uncontrollable belly laugh. Sam came out of the office, her face split by a massive grin.
"Ow."
"Did you see it?" I gasped, wiping tears from my eyes. "It was beautiful," she said, holding up her phone. "And it's already trending on the Neighborhood Watch social media page." I titled it, "Local HOA President Has a Case of the Blues." The video was an instant local sensation. The comments were a glorious flood of laughing emojis and stories of people's own run-ins with Karen. We had done it. We had caught her, humiliated her, and exposed her. For a few hours, it felt like a complete victory. But as I watched her car speed away on the camera footage, replaying that final moment, I saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone who was defeated. It was the look of someone who had just found a new, more vicious reason to fight. The real war was about to start. Sam, meanwhile, was fortifying our digital defenses. She installed 2 new high-definition cameras on the porch, hardwired into a dedicated recording server with a battery backup. One was obvious, mounted right over the door. The other was hidden inside a fake sprinkler head in the flower bed, giving us a perfect low-angle shot. Doorbell cam, porch cam, and the sprinkler cam. Timestamps synced to the second. "We need every angle," she said, running cables through the wall. "We're not just catching her. We're producing a movie." The final piece of the puzzle was the legal one. I wasn't an idiot. I knew setting a trap, even a non-lethal one, could be a legal gray area. So, I covered my bases. I printed a new sign on a huge piece of white plastic sheeting. In big, bold red letters, it read, "Private property. No trespassing. All unlawful entries are prohibited and will be documented. Violators will be met with non-lethal deterrence." I used for heavy-duty bolts to mount it right next to the front door. It was ugly as sin, but it was impossible to miss. I also filed a report with Hilton County PD and wrote the case number on the fridge. No one could claim they weren't warned. With the traps set and the sign posted, the house felt different. It was no longer just a home. It was a fortress waiting for a siege. We didn't change the front door lock. That was the bait. We wanted her to think her key still worked. Every night we'd come home and check the tripwire. Every morning we'd check the camera footage. For 3 days, nothing. The quiet was starting to get to me again. The waiting, gnawing at my nerves. I was starting to think maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she'd given up. On the 4th day, a Tuesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my phone buzzed with a notification from Sam. It wasn't a text. It was a link to a live camera feed. My heart leaped into my throat. I clicked the link. The screen filled with a crystal-clear image of our front porch. And standing there, looking smug and self-satisfied, was Karen Granson. She was holding her stupid clipboard and wearing a crisp, blindingly white pantsuit. She looked left, then right, checking to see if anyone was watching. She didn't see the little black dome of the camera staring right at her. She didn't see the fake sprinkler head aimed at her feet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My key. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling. And Her Majesty was about to step into my FOIA trap. All we had to do now was wait for the splash. My hand was shaking so hard, the phone screen blurred. I took a deep breath, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. This was it, the moment of truth. Sam sent a text message that just said, "Showtime." I could feel the grin in that one word. On the screen, Karen Granson was a portrait of smug arrogance. She held the key up, glinting in the afternoon sun like it owned the place. She gave our new "no trespassing" sign a dismissive sneer, as if the rules were merely suggestions for other, lesser people. She clearly thought the sign was just a bluff, a desperate act from the man who had dared to defy her. She had no idea she was about to become the star of a very short, very colorful film. She slid the key into the lock. My heart hammered. What if the lock was sticky? What if the key didn't turn? But it did. We heard the faint, sickeningly familiar click of the tumbler turning, even through the phone's speaker. The doorknob twisted. She pushed the door inward. For a split second, nothing happened. The door swung open a few inches, revealing the dark entryway behind it. Karen took a confident step forward, her expensive leather shoe crossing the threshold of my home. Her foot snagged the fishing line. It wasn't a relief. It was a warning. She had tried to get in. She had stood on my porch with a key to my home in her hand, and she had tried to open my door. She failed this time. But Karen Granson was not a woman who accepted failure. She would be back, and next time, her key would work. We had to assume she already had a working copy. The question of how far was too far had just been answered. There were no more lines to cross. The line had been drawn, crossed, and then stomped into the dirt. Karen Granson trying to get into my house was a declaration of war. I had no intention of losing. The old John. The world-weary guy who just wanted to be left alone to grill burgers and watch the game was gone. In his place was a version of me that was running on pure, uncut, protective rage. My house was my fortress, and its walls had been breached. It was time to build better walls, and maybe a metaphorical moat, filled with something deeply unpleasant for anyone who tried to cross it without an invitation. "Okay," I said, pacing the living room floor like a caged bear. "She has a key. We can change the locks, but that's just defense. That's waiting for her next move. I'm done waiting." Sam was already steps ahead of me, her face illuminated by the glow of 3 different monitors. Changing the locks is step 1. Step 2 is proving she's the one doing this. We need undeniable proof. We need to catch her in the act. She swiveled in her chair to face me, a glint in her eye that I knew well. It was her. "I have a beautifully devious plan, look. We need to let her think she can get in," she said. "We need to bait the trap." My anger began to cool, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was right. Just stopping her wasn't enough. She had to be exposed. We had to rip her power out by the roots publicly. And for that, we needed to catch her red-handed door, as it would turn out. Blue-handed, my first stop was the internet, where I spent hours researching non-lethal, legal in our state home deterrents. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, as satisfying as the thought might be. I was looking to humiliate. I was looking for something that would leave a mark. Something that screamed, "I was here and I shouldn't have been." I found it in a product used for bank security, a high-potency, non-toxic, industrial-grade fabric dye. It came in a variety of obnoxious colors, but I was drawn to a particularly vivid shade of cobalt blue. The description promised it was stubbornly persistent on fabrics and skin for several days. Perfect the next day. I was at the hardware store, my cart filled with a strange assortment of items, a small plastic bucket, some thin fishing line, a couple of eye hooks, and a factory bottle of washable, non-toxic cobalt marking dye concentrate. No paint. The cashier gave me a weird look. "Big art project?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "Redecorating." Back in my garage, my sacred uninspected garage eye got to work. I was a decent carpenter, a tinkerer by nature, and this was the most satisfying project I'd had in years. The plan was simple, almost cartoonish in its elegance. I would mount the bucket on a small spring-loaded shelf just inside the top of the front door frame. A nearly invisible tripwire, made of the fishing line, would be strung across the bottom of the doorway, connected to the pin holding the shelf in place. When the door opened, the line would pull the pin. The shelf would tip. Whoever was standing in the doorway would get a surprise shower. It was beautiful. "It's working," I grumbled, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn across the street. "It feels like she's always out there." Sam's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Well, let's find out." She pulled up the feeds from the 4 exterior cameras she'd installed when we moved in. We had one covering the porch, one on the driveway, and 2 covering the sides of the house. She rewound the footage from the past 3 days, speeding it up, and there it was. Karen's pristine white SUV. It cruised past our house 4 times on Monday, 6 times on Tuesday. Once, it parked at the end of the neighborhood for a full 20 minutes before driving off. She wasn't just passing by. She was watching us. "Okay, so I'm not crazy," I said, a cold not forming in my stomach. "This is stalking." "It's borderline," Sam corrected, her face grim. "But it's definitely targeted." We watched another hour of passes. Then, something else caught my eye. It was footage from the day before, mid-afternoon. A man I didn't recognize was walking down the sidewalk. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just walking. But as he passed our house, he slowed down. His head turned towards our front yard. He seemed to be looking at the gas meter on the side of the house. He paused for a few seconds, then kept walking. "Who's that?" I asked. Sam zoomed in, but the image was too grainy to get a clear look at his face. "I don't know. Could be anyone." But it felt wrong. Why would anyone be interested in our gas meter? And then it hit me. A jolt of ice water in my veins. My mind flashed back 3 weeks. We'd had a new central air unit installed. The contractors had been here for 2 days to give them access while we were at work. They had put one of those little contractor lockboxes on the gas pipe with a spare key to the front door inside. They were supposed to come back and get it, but they never did. I'd completely forgotten about it. "The lockbox," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was already moving, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and heading for the side door. "John, what is it?" Sam called after me, "The key." I yelled back. I fumbled with the lock on the side gate and hurried to the front of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The little gray lockbox was still there, hanging on the pipe. It looked untouched. I punched in the code the contractor had given me. The face of the lockbox popped open. It was empty. The spare key was gone. Fresh pry marks scuffed the lockbox face. Sloppy work by a pro. I stood there in the dark, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my hand. It all clicked into place. Karen's surveillance. The strange man looking at the side of the house. She hadn't hired him to intimidate me. She'd hired him to get that key, to pop open that cheap little box, take our key, and probably make a copy. He would have put the original back, and we'd never have known. But he must have been interrupted. Or maybe he was just sloppy. He just took it. She had a key to my house. The thought made me physically ill. My home, my sanctuary, the one place in the world where my family was supposed to be safe, was compromised. My protective instincts went into overdrive, a roaring fire of rage and fear. This had crossed every line imaginable. This wasn't about bylaws or garage clutter anymore. This was a direct, personal attack. I stormed back inside, slamming the door behind me. "She has a key," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "That son of a..." He took the key from the lockbox. Sam's face went pale. She immediately turned to her main computer, her fingers a blur. "The front door has a smart lock," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "It logs every entry, keyed or coded." She brought up a new screen, a long list of dates and times. "Here," she said, pointing. "Yesterday, 2:14 p.m., manual key entry attempt. Failed." My blood ran cold. Failed? The copy must have been bad, she said. Or the guy who made it was an amateur. It didn't work, but she knows that now. She knows she needs a better copy. I looked around the room. Few people nodded slightly, careful not to let Karen see. Most just stared at their shoes, hoping she wouldn't notice them. They were scared. Karen had fined people into debt for less. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Mr. Winters, this is not a personal request. This is a proposed bylaw for the good of the entire community. If you have nothing to hide, you should have nothing to fear." That line, that stupid, tired line, was the spark. "Oh, I'm not afraid." "Karen," I said, my voice dropping into that low, dangerous gear that Sam calls my "don't start with me" tone. "I'm just protective of my property, my privacy, and my right to not have a petty tyrant with a clipboard nosing around in my business. My garage is for my car and my tools and my junk. It is not an extension of your little kingdom." The word tyrant hung in the air. Someone gasped. Karen's face, for a split second, was a mask of pure rage. Then, just as quickly, she smoothed it over, replacing it with a look of pity. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her voice now cold as ice. "But the community's needs outweigh the peculiar desires of one individual. We will now vote on Bylaw 7C. Of course it passed." Her two board cronies voted yes, and a handful of terrified homeowners followed suit. Most abstained, which was as good as a yes. I just stood there watching. Sam tugged on my sleeve. "Let's go, John." I didn't move. I watched Karen as she gathered her papers, a triumphant little smirk playing on her lips. She looked directly at me across the entire room, and that smirk widened. It wasn't a friendly look. It wasn't a no hard feelings look. It was a promise of trouble. I'd publicly defied her. I'd called her out. And in Karen Granson's world, that was a declaration of war. We walked out of the clubhouse and into the cool night air. The streetlights of our quiet, peaceful neighborhood seemed to buzz with a new kind of menace. "You really did it this time," Sam said, but she wasn't mad. She squeezed my hand. "I'll start beefing up the network security when we get home." I nodded, my jaw tight. I had won the battle of words, but I had a sinking feeling that I'd just started a war. And Karen wasn't done. The question was no longer if she would retaliate, but how and when the first strike would land. The days after the HOA meeting were quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I found myself watching the street more, glancing out the window whenever a car drove by. I felt like I was being watched, a prickly sensation on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. Sam called it paranoia. I called it a healthy dose of suspicion. Karen Granson wasn't the type to let a public challenge go unanswered. She was a planner, a schemer. She would be making a move, and I wanted to see it coming. It started with little things. A package that was marked as delivered, but never showed up on our porch. The morning paper, which I still got because I'm an old soul, found tossed in the bushes. Petty annoyances meant to tell me she was thinking about me. "She's playing head games," Sam said one evening, looking up from her laptop. Her corner of the living room was a nest of screens and cables. She worked from home as a network security consultant, and our house had a digital defense system that could probably repel a small army. "She's trying to get under your skin." I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president kept using a stolen key to enter my house without warning. And her excuse? She said, "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Little did she know, I'd rig my door with a die trap that would turn her into a Smurf on video. But let me start at the beginning, before we dive in. Let me know where you're watching from today. The air in the Hilton County Community Clubhouse always smelled like stale coffee and quiet desperation. It was the kind of beiged, windowless room where good ideas went to die. I was sitting in a flimsy metal chair that groaned every time I shifted my weight, which was often. My wife, Sam, sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, probably checking the perimeter cameras on our house out of habit. We didn't want to be here. Nobody ever wanted to be at a homeowners association meeting, but skipping them was how you ended up with a surprise 10FT inflatable flamingo by law tonight. However, it felt different. There was a weird energy in the room, a nervous tension that had nothing to do with the usual arguments over lawn height or trash can visibility. It was all focused on the woman standing at the podium, Karen Granson, a president, queen of the neighborhood, and a woman who seemed to derive her life force from the misery of others. She had that perfectly styled blonde helmet of hair, sprayed into a hard shell, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She tapped the microphone, a sound like a woodpecker trying to break into a steel drum, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have a few items on the agenda tonight, but I want to start with a new initiative for community safety and property value preservation." I nudged Sam. "Here we go," I muttered. "Prepare for the community beautification Gestapo." Sam gave a tiny smirk, not looking up from her screen. Karen cleared her throat, holding up a clipboard like it was a sacred text. "In light of recent reports of disorderly storage and potential fire hazards, the board is proposing a new bylaw. Bylaw 7C, Routine Garage Integrity Checks." Karen smiled. "Compliance isn't optional on my street." A confused murmur rippled through the 30 or so homeowners crammed into the room. My neighbor, a meat guy named Dave, raised a shaky hand. "What?" "What does that mean, Karen?" Karen beamed at him. "A predator spotting a weakling in the herd." "An excellent question, David. It means that once a quarter, a certified board member will conduct a brief, scheduled inspection of all garages to ensure they are in compliance with our community standards. No excessive clutter, no unapproved modifications, no undeclared home businesses." My blood started to simmer. It was a slow, low heat that I knew well. It was the feeling I got right before my mouth decided to get me into trouble. This wasn't about safety. This was about power. Karen loved having power, and the one place she couldn't exercise it was behind our closed doors. She was trying to kick those doors in, armed with a clipboard and a condescending smile. I felt my hand go up before I had even made a conscious decision to raise it. Karen's eyes locked onto me, and her smile tightened just a fraction. She knew who I was. John Winters. The guy in 114 who planted tomatoes in his front yard until she cited him for unapproved agricultural activity. The guy who painted his front door a shade of dark blue that was 1 hexadecimal code off from the approved palette. I was a thorn in her side, and I think we both enjoyed it. "Yes, Mr. Winters," she said, emphasizing the Mr. to make me sound like a child in the principal's office. "I have a question," I said, my voice louder than I intended. Actually, it's more of a statement. "The answer is no." The murmuring stopped. You could hear the ancient air conditioner rattling in the corner. Karen's face went blank. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice losing its sugary coating. "I'm not sure I understand the question you're answering." "It's not a question," I replied, standing up. "I'm a big guy, not fat. Just solid, and standing up in that little room had an effect. You're proposing that you or one of your cronies get to come into my private property, my garage, my home, and I'm telling you right now, the answer is no. You are not coming into my garage. Not quarterly, not ever."